How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. We're studying Daf Chavav, Daf 26 of Masechta Nedarim, friends. Okay, friends, let me tell you something. Today's complicated Daf. I learned this Daf on the airplane, the Maaseh, initially, it's a complicated one. I think it's complicated. Why not? It's the sugya of neder shehuter miktsasol huter kulo. That if a vow becomes partially permitted, does it become entirely permitted? Now, friends, how does that sound to you? Like a lot of fun, right? Friends, we're going to start in Daf Chafhem with Beis by the two dots. I don't know, a little more than halfway through the page. I mean, it's not such a big page to begin with, but 10 lines from the bottom or so. Tanan, okay, so Ra Osan Ochlin. Ooh, wah. Who remembers what this is talking about? This is talking about a fellow sees a bunch of people eating his figs. He's like, hey, people, that's my figs. I'm making these figs are like korbanos to you. Scram skedaddle. Then he realizes that who was part of this group eating the figs? His father and his brother. So he says, oh, oops. So Beis Shammai had said, right, so if we look back at the Mishnah, right, so it says, Ra'os and Ochlin Te'enim, right, he sees the people eating his figs, V'amar, he says, hey, Arei Alechem Korban, these figs are a sacrifice to you, right, are also to you like a sacrifice. V'nimtzu Aviv V'achiv, and it turns out that his father was part of the group, his brothers. V'yumayin Acherim, and there were other people there as well. Beis Shammai Omrim Hein Mutar Uma She'imoim Asurim. So Beis Shammai says, so what happens is, the father and the brother, they can continue eating the fruits, the figs, because he doesn't mind that, but the other people won't be allowed to eat the figs, whereas Beis Hillel says, no, once, meaning he had initially said that nobody can eat the figs, but once already he says that the father and brother can eat the figs, so then everybody can eat the figs, and that's because of the concept of neder shehuter miktsasol huter kulo. That they vow that is partially permitted, i.e. it's permitted vis-a-vis the father and the brother. So it's permitted for everybody. Fine. So now it says the Gemara, it's not awesome. We learned over there. Where? Later on. Poschin b'shabosus v'yom tovim. That, if a fellow says he's not going to eat meat or drink wine, and okay, so that's his neder, right? He's not going to eat meat and drink wine. But now comes Shabbos, comes Yom Tif. So as an opening to the vow, they say, well, did you realize that you weren't going to be able to enjoy meat and wine on Shabbos and Yom Tif? He says, no, I didn't realize. So Barishona you omrim, Osana yom mutar and Mushar yom masurim. So initially they understood that, okay, so on Shabbos and Yom Tov he was allowed to eat meat and wine because he didn't realize at the time that he made the vow that he wouldn't be, he didn't take into consideration that on Shabbos and Yom Tov he would have to go without meat and wine. So initially they said, okay, so on Shabbos and Yom Tov he can eat meat and drink wine, but the other days it would not be allowed. Until Rabbi Akiva came along, V'limed neder shuter miktsasol huter kulo. And he taught, Rabbi Akiva taught, that a vow that has been partially permitted becomes entirely permitted. And therefore, when they make this opening to say that well, you didn't, that you must not have taken into account Shabbos and Yom Tov, and he says, no, I didn't, so they open it up with regard to Shabbos and Yom Tov, so then it becomes entirely permitted. It basically undoes the entire vow, and he can eat meat and drink wine, because neder shuter miktsasol huter kulo, that once the vow is partially permitted, it becomes entirely permitted. Now we're going to see machlokas between Rabbah and Rave about how to understand the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where Beis Hillel says neder shuter miktsasol huter kulo, whereas Beis Shammai has said that, well, the father and the brothers can eat figs, but nobody else can. So they don't say that Beis Hillel says, well, since the father and the brother can eat the figs, so everybody can eat the figs. Whole neder shehuter miktsasol huter kulo. Whereas Beis Shammai says that no, the father and the brother can eat the figs, but not the other people. Okay, so now we get into some machlokas between Rab and Rava about how to understand the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. It gets a shtickle complicated. Omer Rabbi says Rabbi. The Chuli Alma, so everybody agrees. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree. Kol Eicha Omar, that if the fig guy would have said, if only, right, if I would have known that my father was in the group, he would have said, meaning, what did he initially say in the Mishnah? He says, all of you, right, what does he say in the Mishnah? Korban, right, that these figs are like a korban, are like a sacrifice to all of you. And then it turns out that his father's there. So if, when he finds out that his father is there, he says, oh, oops, what I really would have rather have said was, yeah, none of you guys are allowed to eat the figs except my father. He didn't really change the vow that much, right? Initially it was nobody's allowed to eat the fruits, and now it's nobody's allowed to eat the fruits or figs, nobody's allowed to eat the figs, except for my father. So he only changed it ever so slightly. So in that case, we would, says Rabbi, in that case, even Beis Hillel would admit that we would not say Neder she huter miktsaso huter kulo. We would not say that, well, since it was nullified with regard to, right, since it was permitted with regard to the father, it's permitted with regard to everybody. No. Initially he said that nobody's allowed to eat the figs, and now he's only changing it ever so slightly to say nobody's allowed to eat the figs except for his father. Right? So again, so if he says, if I would have known that my father was there, Hayisi Omer, I would have said, Kulchem Asurim, yes, no, none of you are allowed to eat the figs. Chutz me'aba, the exception being for my father, making an exception. The chulo nasurin v'aviv mutter. So in that case, okay, nobody's going to be allowed to eat the figs, but the father would be allowed to eat the figs. Just the father. Lo nechleku ela, but where there's a machlokas and where Beis Hillel says that neder shutu miktzosu huter kulo and everybody's allowed to eat the figs, is ela ba'omer ilu ayisi odea sha'aba b'nechem. If it's when he says, oh, if I would have known that my father was with you, I would have made something completely different. I would have said ayisi omer. I would have said ploni asurin v'aba mutter. You and you asur. My father is mutter. Right? So initially he had said nobody's allowed to eat the figs. And then he realizes that his father is there. And there's two possibilities for how he could have reacted. One is that he could say, okay, nobody's allowed to eat the figs except for my father. That's one way. Which is basically very similar to his initial statement, which is nobody can eat the figs. And now he's saying nobody can eat the figs except for my father. But an alternative way to amend it would have been to not say that nobody's allowed to eat the figs, but rather to be more specific, to say, okay, you're not allowed to eat figs, you're not allowed to eat figs, my father, you can eat figs, right? It's more like a blacklist versus like a whitelist almost. But anyways, right, so if you would have changed it to be more specific and say, Ploni asurin, you two people are asurin, not everybody's asurin except for my father, but you're asur. The Abba mutter, my father is mutter, so he basically changed the vow. So in that case, we'll say, look, now, right, Beis Hillel says, now that you're changing the vow, so neder shuter miktzoso huter kulo. That once already you're changing it vis-a-vis his father, and permitting the father, so he's permitting it to everybody as well. So according to Rabbah, if he basically maintained the same structure of the vow, and he says, look, nobody's allowed to eat the figs except for my father, well, in that case, we're not going to sort of uproot the entire vow, and we're going to say that still everybody else is not allowed to eat it, just his father can eat it. But if Imamish changes the whole structure of the vow, and whereas initially he had said nobody's allowed to eat the figs, and now he says specifically you can't eat the figs and you can't eat the figs, but my father can eat the figs, well then Beis Hillel would say neder shuter miktzoso huter kulo, and everybody can eat it, but Beis Shammai would maintain that no, only the father can eat it, but nobody else. V'Rave Omar, whereas Rave says the opposite, that when it comes to the case of you and right, when he changes it to say that you and you are not allowed to eat figs, but my father can eat figs, so in that case everybody agrees. Even Beis Shammai would agree. Neder huter miktzoso huter kulo. Where they argue is the case where he maintains that nobody's allowed to eat the figs except for his father. So in that case, Beis Hillel still says neder shuter miktzoso huter kulo, but Beis Shammai is going to say that the father can eat the figs, but the other people cannot. Rav Amar d'chuli alma, everybody agrees. Even Beis Shammai agrees. If I would have known that my father was with you, Haisi Omer, I would have changed the template, the format of the vow to be Ploni Asur, and you are Asur, V'Abba Mutar, my father's permitted, Kulam Mutarin. In that case, we would say whole neder shutu miksasu kulo, that the figs are permitted to everybody. Lo nechelku ella, where there's this machlokas is beomer, right? So the meanings, right? So the figs would be permitted to everybody. So where they argue is beomer, where the fellow says, Ilu ayisi yodea sha'aba benechem, if I would have known that my father was with you, ayisi omer, I would have said kulchem asurim, that yes, while all of you are asur, chutz me'aba, my father, right? All of you are asur except for my father who's permitted. Beis Shammai savrei la Reb Meir. Beis Shammai old like Reb Meir, Domer tfos lashon rishon, who says that you go based on the initial I feel like I'm like forgetting this word that I'm trying to think of. The format, structure, saying, formulation, I think is probably what I'm thinking of. The initial formulation, and therefore, the other people are asurin. The father is permitted. Whereas Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Yossi says, no, you go based on the end. And if at the end he said that, the father is permitted and everybody else is also said, neder shutu miksaso huter kulo, and everybody is going to be permitted. So that's the machlokas between Rava and Rabbi. Okay. Now, Eisvei Rav Papa l'Rava, and here it gets pretty confusing. If I had to say, I'd say it gets pretty confusing over here. It gets pretty confusing. You ready to get confused? Well, ready or not, here we come. Eisvei Rav Papa l'Rava. So Rav Papa asks a kasha to Rava. Now, he quotes a brisa, I guess. Keitzad Omer Abakive. How did Rabbi Akiva say, in what context did Rabbi Akiva say that when a vow is partially permitted, it's entirely permitted? So we basically have three cases now with three different outcomes. Well, three cases now with different outcomes. Konam she'eni nene lekulchem. So he makes a neder that he's not going to get any benefit from any of you. Huter echad me mutu kulam. So then, if one of them becomes permitted, so then all of them become permitted. So in the first case, we're saying, right, neder shutu mikzaso huter kulo. She'eni nene lo lozev v'lo lozev. He says, I'm not going to get benefit from this fellow or from that fellow. Huter arishon huter kulam. So if the first one becomes permitted, then all of them become permitted. So again, huter mikzaso huter kulam. But huter ha'achrin, if the last one became permitted, ha'achrin muter v'chulan asurim. The last one is permitted, but everybody else is asurim. Okay, fine. So we have three cases, right? The first two cases, basically, we say neder shuter mikzaso huter kulam. And in the last one, we're saying, no, the last one is permitted, but everybody else is asur. Okay, fine. Now, Bishlam l'Rabba. So now, Rav Papa says to Rava, I understand according to Rabba, okay, that according to Rabba, who says that when he basically keeps the initial formulation intact, just that he makes an exception for his father, so everyone would agree that the father is permitted, everybody else is asur. But the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is specific when he changes the formulation to be you and you are asur, the father is mutter. In that case, Beis Hillel would say neder shuter mikzaso huter kulo. So b'shlam l'Rabba mukim l'reisha. So the first part, yeah, this is where I get confused. The reisha, I think, is referring to the first two contexts. One second. Yes, the first two sections, right? So b'shlam l'Rabba mukim l'reisha. So the first two sections, i.e., when we're saying neder shuter mikzaso huter kulo, and we're saying that it's dafka the opinion of Beis Hillel, it's dafka the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which would imply that the rabbis argue. So the Amar loze v'loze. So we would say that it's talking about a situation where he's saying that where he changes the formulation of the vow to say, you two specifically are also and you are permitted. So in that case, we would say, right, so, Rabbi Akiva is saying, Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo in that case, is implying that the rabbis would argue. V'seifa, and in the Seifa where it says that only the Achron is permitted, but everybody else is Asurin. So the Amr Lekulchem is where he's saying Lekulchem, right? There's the formulation of all of you are Asur except for you. So in that case, the people that are permitted, the people that are Asur are Asur. Okay, fine. But according to you, Rave, Bishlama Reisha, I understand that the first part, now in this case I think first part means specifically the first case. Right, so the first case where we say, right, we say, Bishlama Reisha Dumukim Lav the Amar Likulchem, right, the first case in this brisa where Rabbi Akiva says, Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, so we will say that is talking about a situation of Kulchem, right, the Amar Likulchem. Because according to Rave, when you say to you and to you, right, you and you are also, but you're permitted. So, according to Rava, everybody would agree, Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo. But in a situation where he says all of you are forbidden, except for you. So, Rava says in that case, there's a machlokas. Right? Beis Hillel says, Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo. And Beis Shammai disagrees. So here also, we'll say that Dafka, it's, Rabbi Akiva who's saying Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, but the rabbis would argue, right? So I understand that the first part where we say Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, so that would be where we say Lekulchem, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. El Seifa, but in the next part, the next section, the Amar Laza, right in the middle section, the Amar Laza V'Laza, where he says specifically you and you, and we're saying that Rabbi Akiva says Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, Rabbi Akiva Amai Plige Rabbanon Ole. Then why are we saying that this is Dafka, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, Ve'amar Divrei HaKol Muter? But Rava, didn't you say that when it comes to being specific, you and you, everybody would agree Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo? So then I don't understand, Rava, how could it be that in this brisa, when it says Laze Ve'Laze, and we're saying that Dafka it's Rabbi Akiva's opinion that Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, but why is it Dafka Rabbi Akiva's opinion? Rava, I thought you said everybody would agree that Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo in that case. So Amalei Rava, so Rava responds to our Papa, Rabba, but according to Rabba, Rabbi Akiva Minicha, is it any better according to Rabba? According to Rabba's opinion, is understanding Rabbi Akiva any easier? Seifa b'may mukimla. How do you understand the Seifa, the last part according to Rabba, where we say that the last person is permitted, but everybody else is asur? De Omar Lekulchem. It's talking about where you say, right, to all of you, except for that other person. We say that the other person is permitted, but everybody else is asur. But hey deinu rishon ve deinu achrin. But who's the first one and who's the last one? Right, meaning, in the brisa, in the middle section of the brisa, it says that, that if he says Lazav Lazav, so then the first, right, so if he, what did it say? It said, Huter Arishon Hutru Kulam. If the first one is permitted, well then all of them are permitted. Huter Achron Achron Muter V'Chulan Asur. And if the last one was permitted, so the last one's permitted, but everybody else is Asur. But if we're talking about Lekulchem, where he says to everybody, so who's the first and who's the last? Right? Hey, Deinu Rishon, who's the first one? Vei Deinu Achron, who's the last one? If we're just lumping everybody together. Ella, Reisha de Omar Lekulchem. So the first part of that brisa, where it says, Neder Shuter Mikzaso Huter Kulo, and it's Dafka the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, is where it says Lekulchem. So he's saying to all of you. V'seifa, and then the next two sections are Kigon Shetlon Zeboze. It's where they make them dependent on the other one. V'amar ploni kifloni ufloni kifloni. And he's saying that you are like the previous person, and you're like the previous person, right? They keep on permitting the other people. I'm sorry. So he says that each person is also like the next person, right? So you're also and you're also like that person, and then the next person is also like them. So when we say if you permit the first person, so then all of them become permitted. But if you only permit the last one in the chain, so then the last one is permitted, but everybody else remains also, right? So he's going to that he made them dependent on one another. Ploni kefloni, he says, look, you're also, and then the next person is also like the previous person, and the next person like the person before that, right? So ploni kefloni, they can, right? And then you say, so if the first person becomes permitted, so then they all become permitted. But if only he permits the last ones, then the previous ones remain also. Dekanami, you can also infer the Tanya as we learn in the Brayso, Ohutor emtsoi hemenu lamata mutar, and if the one in the middle becomes permitted, so from that one and further down are permitted. Ulamaila asurim, but everybody above would be forbidden. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? So they tried to ask Kashas on Rava, and Rava seemed to stand his ground. So now, Eizve Ravada bar Ahava l'Ravis, now Ravada bar Ahava asked the Kasha on Rava, Konam botzel shani toim. Fellow says, look, I'm not going to eat any onions. Alright. Shabotzel rala lev, because onions are bad for your heart. Alright. Amrulo, they said to him, Valo kufri yofal, but they said, 1 second, but kufri onions are taka very, very good for the heart. Okay. Hutter be kufri, so he's allowed to eat the kufri onions, velo be kufri bavad hutter ele b'chol habitzolim. And by the way, it's not just the kufri, onions that are allowed, but actually all of the onions are allowed. So it sounds like we're saying that neder shutu miktsas uter kulo, right? That he initially said he's not going to have any onions, but from the fact that they say no, he can have the kufri ones, and we're saying now he can have all onions. Ma'asoi v'tiru Reb Meir b'chol habitzolim. And a talk happened once that there was a Maisa with Reb Meir, and he says, yeah, right, neder shutu miktsas uter kulo, that if it's partially permitted, it's entirely permitted. So now the interesting thing about Reb Meir is that he was in cahoots. Is that what it's saying? That he was together with Beis Shammai earlier, right? Right. According to Rava had said that when it comes to kulchem, right? When he says that all of you are also except for my father. So Beis Shammai holds like Reb Meir, who says Tvos Lashon Rishon, that you go based on the initial formulation, and everybody's going to be forbidden, but the father is going to be permitted. Whereas we said Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Yossi that you go based on the Besof Dvar of Adam Nitpas. So we see that Beis Shammai is like Reb Meir, and if we're saying over here that Reb Meir is saying neder shutu miktsasa huter kulo, and we're saying that Beis Shammai holds like Reb Meir, and according to Rava says that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree when it comes to, you and you are also, my father is mutter. But we want to assume right now, what does it say over here? So what does it say over here? My lab, the Omer, ilu ayisi odea shakufri yofel alev, and the Gemara wants to ask against Rava that, let's assume that this is talking about where he says, look, if I would have known that the kufri onions are good for my heart, ayisi Omer, I would have said, kol habitzalim asurim, all onions are asur, the kufri mutter, but the kufri onions are permitted. And we're saying that, right, neder shuter miktsasa huter kula. And we're saying that Reb Meir agrees with that. But if we're talking about where he says that all of the onions are also except for the kufris, I thought Beis Shammai says in that case, right, according to Rava, Beis Shammai would say that only the kufris are permitted, but not the rest of the onions. But over here we're saying that Reb Meir is saying that just like the kufri are permitted, all of the onions are permitted. But if Reb Meir is like Beis Shammai, I thought he would say that only the kufris would be permitted. So lo ba'omer ilu ayisi yodea shakufri yofel lev. No, it's talking about where he says, if I would have known that the kufri onions are good for the heart, ayisi omer, I would have said botzel ploni ufloni asurin. This onion and this onion are also the kufri mutter, but the kufri onions are permitted. V'Reb Meir alibud Rabbi Kiva ve'alibud Rabbanan, and therefore in that case, right, Rava had said that everybody would agree, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would agree that neder shutu mikzaso huter kulo, and therefore when Reb Meir said that you can eat all the onions, it's both like Rabbi Akiva as well as the rabbis. Whether you say that everyone's going to agree in that case, neder shutu mikzaso huter kulo. Eizve, we have Ravina l'Rave. Ravina has Sakasha to Rava. Rav Nosson Omer, says Rav Nosson, Yesh neder shemikzaso muter mikzaso aser. That there are vows that are partially permitted and partially forbidden. Ketzad, how is this? Nedarim al kalkole. If a fellow says he's not going to eat any figs, but they were very geschmacke figs over there. And he says, if I would have known that there are very geschmacke figs over there, lo ayisi noder hakalkola asura b'no shuach mutaris. What? Lo ayisi noder. I'm sorry. Lo ayisi noder. I wouldn't have made that kind of an eder. So hakalkola asura b'no shuach mutaris. So we say that the kalkola, that the figs would be not allowed, but the geshmake figs would be allowed. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came, v'limed, and he taught neder shutu mikzaso tekulo, that once the neder is allowed vis-a-vis these geshmake figs, they're allowed vis-a-vis all of them. So we see that there's this machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim with regard to is it just the geshmake figs that are permitted, or are all the figs permitted? So now, Rava would say that this machlokas is dafka by, right, when all of them are permitted, but one of them is asur, as opposed to this and this are asur. So, my lab, de Omar ilu ayisi odeh shebno shuach besocha, and isn't this talking about where he would have said that if I would have known, that where he would say that if I would have known that there were these geshmake figs, hayisi omer te'enim shchoris ulivanis asuris, I would say that the black ones and the white ones are asuris, but b'no shuach mutaris. But the b'no shuach are mutaris. V'Rabbi Akiva and we're saying it's dafka Rabbi Akiva who says neder she uter mikzaso tekulo uflige rabbanon, and the rabbis argue, and it's talking about even though it's where it's specific, and he's saying the black ones and the white ones are asur, and the b'no shuach are muter. So that's unlike Rava, who would say that everybody would agree in that case that neder shutu mikzaso tekulo. Lo ba'omer ilu hayisi odeh sheb'no shuach besocha hayisi omer. No, rather this machlokas is, meaning we would answer for Rava that this machlokas is where, when he says that if I would have known that the b'no shuach, that the geshmake figs were there, hayisi omer kol kalkola asura u'b'no shuach mutaris, I would say the entire, all these figs are forbidden, but the b'no shuach are permitted. And Rava would say in that case is taka machlokas about, do we say neder shutu mikzaso tekulo? Man tana la dutanu rabbanon. Who is the author of the following brisa? Nader mechamisha bnei adam. If a fellow said he's not going to get benefit from any of these people, ke'echod huter le'echod mehem hutru kulon. And then if he becomes permitted to one of them, he becomes permitted to all of them. Chutz me'echod mehem. Now, if he says, with the exception of one of them, hu mutter ve'hen asurin, so then he's permitted to that one fellow, but everybody else would be not allowed. So, ila Rabba, if it's Rabba, Reisha, Rabbi Akiva, ve'seifa divrei hakol. So if it's according to Rabba, so then the first part, where it's saying basically you and you are asur, but the other person is mutter. So that is dafke, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. V'seifa, when he says that all of you are forbidden except for you, and we're saying that so this guy is mutter, but everybody else is asur. Divrei hakol, that's going to be according to everybody, according to Rabba. Either Rava, and if it's according to Rava, seifa rabbanon. The Seifa, where it says that, that you are asur, but everybody else is mutter, and it's talking about a situation where, all of you are forbidden except for you. So who's going to say that that he's only permitted to that one person, but forbidden to everybody else? That would have to be the opinion of the rabbis in that case. V'reisha, but according to the first part where it says you and you are asur, but you're permitted, divrei hakol, everybody would say that neder shutu mikzaso tekulo. Friends, that was daf chav vav of Masechta Nedarim. Friends, not a pashut sugya of neder shutu mikzaso tekulo, that when a vow becomes permitted, it becomes entirely permitted. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. We also saw a machlokas between of course, in our Mishnah, we had the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says neder shuta miksaso tekulo, whereas Beis Hillel says that no, you can have some people permitted and some people also. We saw a machlokas between Rabbah and Rava about in which cases do we, in which cases does everybody agree? According to Rabbah, nobody, we never have a situation where everybody agrees that neder shuta miksaso tekulo. According to Rabbah, if he completely changes the vow, so then Beis Hillel would say neder shuta miksaso tekulo, but Beis Shammai would disagree. And according to Rava, he says that if he completely changes it, then everybody agrees that neder shuta miksaso tekulo. But if he didn't completely change it, so then Beis Shammai would say that it's only partially permitted. Friends, that was Daf Chav Vav of Masechta Nedarim. I hope that you enjoyed. Peace out.